I'm going to do sort of three things today. It's more or less three talks mashed together. I'm told I have 15 to half an hour, which should be fine. I first want to go on a little bit of a rant about artificial intelligence. Then I want to walk you through a project that I'm working on with some colleagues called Building a Fichero, New Tools, Old Documents, and Machine Learning Workflows with an endangered Afro-Colombian archive. And then I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about AI for writers. So I'm beginning with an assumption, which is everyone here has at least played with some of these new AI tools, ChatGPT, Claude, Llama, whatever it is. So I'm not going to get into some of those nuts and bolts. But I wanted to begin with a rant. How does it go? I'm a writer. I love words. To quote Chilean poet Pablo Neruda in his memoir on words, you can say anything you want, yes, sir, but it's the words that sing. They soar and descend. I bow to them, I love them, I cling to them, I run them down, I bite into them, I melt them down, I love words so much. The unexpected ones, the ones I wait for greedily or stalk until suddenly they drop. Vowels I love, they glitter like colored stones, they leap like silver fish, they foam, thread, metal, dew. I run with certain words. They are so beautiful that I want to fit them all into my poem. Words matter to me greatly, which is why I was intrigued, horrified, scared, interested in November 2022 when I and most of us probably first heard about this thing called ChatGPT. And it took me a while to think about how I thought about these tools. And I want to do a little bit of ranting about AI in the classroom, right? Using AI to synthesize words. And then I want to turn to thinking about how it can be a useful tool for a certain research project that I'm part of, and then how it can be tools for writers. And one of the ways I've come to think about this, think about the idea of using ChatGPT to write something, right? That you pass off as your own, writing a lecture, right? Or an essay, a thesis, an assignment. It's almost like my daughter, who's 4, sitting down at a kid's digital piano, right? I'm sure you all know what I'm thinking about. The piano has a demo button, and you press a button, and it starts to play music. And sometimes my daughter, who's 4, will look up at me smiling, right? She's very happy. She's playing the piano. Of course, she's not, right? She hasn't taken the time, because she's 4, to work out how to play, taken the years that takes. And I'm liable to take the view that synthesizing text, using ChatGPT, or these tools, passing it off as your own, is an exercise not unlike her playing that piano. It's also an exercise of plagiarism, in my opinion. Plagiarism, of course, being passing off text that's not your own, as your own. What ChatGPT, Claude, and these other tools allow you to do for the first time is generate words. Almost carte blanche. It's a kind of unholy text synthesizer. And here I'm quoting an article from The Atlantic at the time. The issue, of course, is not least plagiarism, but that the results are frankly, at least for any extended piece of text, read almost like someone is moving too fast, faster than they can think, bringing in new ideas, concepts, directions at breakneck speed, and you're left wondering where you're going. Okay, so with my rant out of the way, that is, using AI to generate words for a thesis or an essay, it's plagiarism. What the heck am I here to talk about in an AI grad booster for graduate students here at UNB at the library? So I want to walk you through a project that I'm working on with some colleagues. How might one use AI in a way that is not as an unholy text plagiarism machine, but as a tool? So this is a paper that I'm working on with Andrew Janko, who's a digital librarian at the University of Pennsylvania, and Kelly Lopez, who's a graduate student in Columbia. And here I want to describe the challenges and creative possibilities encountered in building a catalog, a fichero, a box of index cards and digital artifacts, a spreadsheet, website, PDF, atlas, and so forth, from an endangered Afro-Colombian archive. Our approach combines two workflows, right? One centered on people, and second centered on machine learning, or AI. Throughout, our goal is to support local knowledge producers in preserving, digitizing, cataloging, and interpreting, and making it accessible the Circuit Court Archive of Izmina in Northwest Colombia. By bringing together social intelligence, palpable among culturally competent archivists, and artificial intelligence, developed with a machine learning workflow, we argue for a novel, in-place way of doing archival work. Our approach centers on creating short-term employment and longer-term skills building, the better to put machine learning tools at the service of people. So the province of the Choco in northwestern Colombia, and if I was more organized, I would have a map here of Colombia. It's in this northern tip of South America. It's a region of rainforests and rivers. Its capital, Quibdó, has a population of roughly 150,000 people, and smaller municipalities and hamlets are scattered along the banks and tributaries of its two main river systems, the Atrato and the San Juan River. The region has criminal levels of poverty and faces an armed conflict fueled by the drug trade and illegal gold mining. Like much of the Colombian Pacific, historiography has tended to marginalize the Choco, in part because of racism against its Afro-descendant and indigenous population. Indeed, the province of the Choco has been a home to resource extraction for decades, centuries. By the late 18th century, Choco had made New Granada, the colony from which Spain derived most of its gold. European and American companies came in the late 19th century, using mercury amalgamation and large industrial dredges. South American Gold and Platinum, a well-capitalized firm based in New York, operated in the village of Andagoya, near Izmina, throughout much of the 20th century. Today, the Choco remains home to an extra-legal, wildcat, small-scale gold mining and artisanal mining boom, which was the topic of my first book, right? I'm an anthropologist, so I spent 2 years learning how to gold mine. The Choco's history is one where outsiders have long turned natural resources into export commodities, which brings the ethical risks of machine learning, tools, and digital extractivism into special focus. By focusing on employment and skills building, we are interested in outlining a way to preserve, digitize, catalog, and interpret an archive without reproducing the extractivist cycle. So this archive, this is the archive in 2021. It holds an important source of records from 1870 to 1930 at the Izmina court, a regional court. The rotting and disorganized records were stored in garbage bags in a non-climate controlled room until 2022. The records hold great potential for education and research, including by Chocuanos interested in family history, property claims, and other aspects of the past, as well as by historians and other researchers, like anthropologists. Yet its size and complexity of 61,000 images, divided into 800 legal expedientes, poses challenges. This is one example. There's water damage, there's lost paper. These faded water, insect, and mold damages, typewritten and manuscript, handwritten in dozens of different typescripts, pages are hard to read. After training, dedicated interns cleaned and sorted the records into organized boxes and expedientes or case folders. Each contains inheritance claims, legal challenges, familial and village level disputes, and other materials. After describing their work, which we call the semillero, or a seedbed, with pedagogical purpose, we outline a complementary approach to cataloging which uses a machine learning workflow developed by my co-authors Andy Janko and myself after a trip to Quibdó, the capital, in August 2023. With the tool we're building, we use open source software to prepare, transcribe, process, and create a catalog from this archive. We argue in the conclusion for machine learning tools that empower rather than replace archivists in a synthesis of social and artificial intelligence. So I want to very quickly walk you through the process to go from that archive to what we have now. Okay. In 2022, my colleagues Anne Farnsworth Alviar, Daniel Verla, Maria Fernanda Parra, and Sergio Mosquera began work on a collaborative semillero, or seedbed, between experienced historians and paid intern archivists from Izmina and Quibdó. The goal was to preserve the court by digitizing and making them accessible on the British Library's Endangered Archives website, while making the work relevant to local communities, local interns working on the project. And through interpretation, there were two phases, digitization and cataloging. So in the first, we have two young people here, Angelica and Jason, who photographed the archival pages. It took them a year. They worked with 4 or 5 boxes of documents a week. The interns used a high-resolution camera, archival lamps, and took really high-quality photographs of each page. And second, there were a group of 4 interns, Ernestina Uslady, Jon Neleli, and Javier from Quibdó, who worked with digital tablets to read and catalog the expedientes. So for the better part of a year, the 5 worked Monday to Friday, reviewing cases, writing descriptions, extracting key names, locations, people, organizations, and noting observations on the material. Every Friday, they met as a team with the historians to discuss the most interesting parts of each case. Discussions were many about companies, crime, family conflict, concubinage, health. Oh, sorry. I was scratching my lav mic. Healthcare and other themes. These discussions brought the work to life for a meaningful experience for the interns. Indeed, the opportunity to spend a year being paid to read and make history was a unique experience, something only accessible to a tiny number of Colombians educated in elite institutions. Over time, the interns provided crucial regional knowledge. Over time, the interns provided crucial regional knowledge to help decipher hard-to-read documents written in 19th century legal script. And after a year, each intern wrote an interpretive essay that was published in a book. The approach of building the semillero and the catalog had its limitations, of course. Cataloging is time-consuming, and many expedientes remain uncatalogued. In addition, the intern's work had errors of spelling, fact, interpretation, which required correction by a trained historian. Still, the benefits of involving young people included creating employment in a region with few opportunities and allowed interns to bring their cultural experience to the catalog, which improved the quality of the text and relevance of the metadata. The collaborative approach fostered a sense of pride with the interns and contributed to preserving history. They presented their work. We took them to Bogota last year. They presented their work at the National Library, the National Archive, and 2 elite institutions. So I want to flip gears now and talk you through Fichero, right? Fichero is a project that emerges in 2023 when Andy, myself, and various librarians head down to Quibdó. And Andy and I, who are both, well, I'm secretly a computer geek, and he's a systems engineer at UPenn, we started talking about the possibilities of using large language models and handwriting and optical character recognition to tackle some of the challenges of doing a catalog using machine learning tools, which is what I want to describe to you very quickly right now, before we get on to some of the possibilities of that and then some other ways of using tools. So we were interested not in using commercial solutions, e.g. Google Vision or Transcribus, or large language models from OpenAI or Anthropic. And we were interested in using tools that you can run on a relatively low-cost computer, for example, my 4-year-old MacBook, which still isn't that old, but it has 16 gigs of RAM. We wanted to make a tool that was accessible to researchers in Colombia, students, organizations, and communities. And crucially, we wanted a solution where there was no marginal cost, because running AI on 61,000 images, even if it's a small cost, it starts to add up. So what we're working on is a tool that has 4 steps that I'm going to walk through very quickly. So what we're using is something. Well, first, as an aside, all of the names of these tools are slightly insane. We first use a tool called Weasel, which allows you to string various scripts together and break down the project into lots of different steps. It's a digital workflow system that allows us to define variables, paths, tools, and so forth. So the first step in the Weasel workflow is preparation, right? And here we are downloading all of the images from the British Library, the associated metadata for processing, collection files, each image metadata, and so forth. Or you can point it at a folder of images on your computer, right? If you're a researcher, you might have something you want to work on, catalog yourself. The second step is transcription. That is turning handwriting into text. And we've tried this various approaches. The first was using a tool called Kraken, which is out of Europe. Kraken allows you to first segment an image, which is automatically generate a line, a baseline for each line of text, and then draw a little box around it, which you can then, ideally, if you transcribe it both sides, you can then train a machine learning model using Kraken that will transcribe it. Just checking my time. So I've got about 11 minutes left. Yeah. OK. So we initially carefully hand-trained 100 pages of different text, which gave us training material, which we could then use to train a Kraken model. We were very excited, but after 6 months of trying, we couldn't actually get useful results. We tried working with Google Vision to do the same task, and it was so unreliable it was almost useless. All of this changed in August 31st, when Alibaba released something called Qwen VL, which is an open source large language model. Comes in various sizes, but both the 2B and the 7B sizes you can run in your computer, and we are getting out of the box really accurate results with Qwen 7B. In other words, by sending it segmented lines of text, we're able to get basically human-level transcription. The next step is processing. This is Qwen, fine-tuning a Qwen model. The next step is processing. And this is what you do if you have decent text from a document. Here we turn to creating a catalog. And first we generate summaries of each page, and then we are experimenting with different ways of using large language models that you can run in your computer, which means you don't need to send data to San Francisco, to Silicon Valley. And we're producing a summary, metadata, extracting named entity recognition, dates, people, places, and timelines at each level of each expediente, and then bringing them together to make a catalog. From there, the next step is to publish it, right? To convert it into something useful. To export it, right? So here we're looking at, and I can't find my notes, converting it to an Excel spreadsheet of the catalog, right? Converting it to a website. My personal favorite is markdown plain text files that you can search and use. Creating a search engine, putting it on a portable server that we can then take to Colombia, where there's not always good Wi-Fi, and do interesting work with there. Or to put it into visualization tools like Atlas and start to explore the themes in the archive. So I think I have about 5 minutes left. So I want to sort of very quickly conclude on the Fichero, which I think is quite promising, at generating a catalog, a machine-generated catalog. But it's crucially, while relying on machine learning for transcribing and creating a catalog is promising, without the social intelligence of expert historians and archivists of the Semillero, the approach carries risks, right? A machine learning pipeline might be used to replace skilled labor in the cataloging process, which would threaten livelihoods and risk losing cultural knowledge and contextual understanding and lead to inferior work. If mined for data by machines without regard for its cultural significance or the communities it represents, machine learning tools are likely to not only make mistakes, but reproduce cycles of extractivism. Indeed, investing in expensive machines, commercial solutions, and machine learning pipelines in ways that sideline skilled work risks perpetuating the very cycles of primitive accumulation that have plagued the Chocó. What's working with the Fichero is the fact you're doing it with these interns, with the archivists, and we're checking back and forth at each level to see how it's going. So that was my second part of the talk, and I want to conclude. These are some of the outputs. So an Excel output, markdown files. This is in Obsidian, a search engine of another project we're working on, a server, a Word file. I like reading Word files, and then the big data atlas. Okay. Third, I want to go back to writing and thinking about AI as a tool for writers, not as a replacement for writers, right? I think this is crucial. And I want to make a case here very briefly that we think of writing not merely as the transmission of ideas that you've already thought, but that writing itself is more akin to construction. When we write, we create ideas. We can develop arguments. We work out what we think on the page. And this is what can't be outsourced to AI, right? Because to do that, you don't actually know what you think about something. You haven't done the work of making ideas and thoughts external to yourself and then working with them, thinking with them, revising them, changing, right? If you just say to an AI, write me a talk about whatever, you don't know what you think. But it is in that work, right, of thinking about writing as a whole bunch of discrete steps that together add up to the work. There is a space for thinking about AI tools, right? I'm going to give you a few examples in the 3 minutes that Mark is going to give me before I get cut off. And this is one. I'm a very fast typist, right? But my relationship to spelling is much like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in Colombia. And he always had typists, people who would correct his spelling. And ChatGPT, like Grammarly or ProWritingAid or Spellcheck before them, are pretty damn good at correcting my spelling, right? Fixing the punctuation. Now, you have to be very careful with your prompt to give instructions, don't change my words, just fix the spelling. But I find it a quite useful tool, as I'm sure many of you do. I'm seeing some people nodding. Sometimes it's useful to think of as a glorified thesaurus, right? You might have a sentence and say, hey, give me a list of 5 potential words that could fit as adjectives for the nouns in this sentence. It gives you new ways to look at your own text. So then you can start to think about, wait, does this work better? Or might this work better? It gives you a tool. Another one, sometimes you're reading a PDF, you find a great list of citations, you want to get them into your bibliographic manager, and it's pretty good at converting a citation into a bibtext that you can then import. Another one that I've got working very recently is being able to take my own handwriting. I write most things drafting, longhand, to get ideas down, and being able to run this through Qwen, get text of what I wrote out with never having to leave my own computer is quite useful. It's something I use all the time. So I want to conclude with reflecting on an episode of the Ezra Klein show of the New York Times that I heard a few months ago. And he's interviewing a business professor. And the business professor is getting his students to use AI not as a tool. The professor says that's the mistake. Don't use it as a tool. What you have to do is use it to do the work as a replacement for human labor. And I'm not convinced. I find that quite terrifying, in fact, because it misses the important point about accountability, about who's doing the work, about thinking, about what it means. And I'm not sure any of that can be outsourced, even as at the same time, there are ways that artificial intelligence can be used as a tool for doing, I think, quite interesting research that I hope I showed you with the Fichero, or for the more everyday, mundane aspects of working with text, not synthesizing. On that front, I'm going to conclude and pass it over to the next speaker.
All right. Okay. Sorry. for the technical difficulties, but thanks for your patience for a copyright session. This doesn't always keep people in their seats that long, but thank heavens for AI to bring people back to copyright sessions. I'm going to address some of the topics that was brought up in the last talk. I didn't prepare something written, and I was a little nervous about that until it started happening. I thought, if I'd written something, I wouldn't be able to sort of bring these sort of concepts to what we just heard that I think are perfect for where I'm going to try to go with keeping copyright exciting, but being able to look at where research and where the ethical use of AI is sort of leading us on a golden path. First, I have to always say this is not any legal advice. Taking something from this and going to a publisher or a lawyer would be foolhardy on your part. It was almost as foolish as taking something from ChatGTP and using it. But I do have some experience in where copyright interacts with information, with your research, with publication, and where you're going to move that, knowledge and information into your professional activities. So that's where I'm assuming you are as graduate students. You're on the next level. You're not, you've moved from undergraduate learning some of the skills of writing and research, and now you're sort of honing those skills into something a bit more economically viable, maybe from an intellectual property standpoint. And so that's what we're going to start with. What is copyright and why it's important? Then move into where AI fits in copyright legally, and then try to sort of pull those thoughts together into what it is for graduate research, and if there's any time left, some implications. So what is copyright? Copyright is an exclusive right to your work, whether it be literary, music, dramatic, cinematographic, anything that you're studying or pursuing here on campus is quite likely listed in that list of works that copyright protects. And what it protects is your ability to do these things with it. Reproduce it, sell it, sign it away to a publisher if you like, keep it yourself, adapt it, and it also gives you moral rights to it, something that is often overlooked in this sort of environment of publishing and making our intellectual property works available. So what copyright's trying to do right now, and has always been trying to do, is mold itself to different ways that we're communicating. And artificial intelligence and ChatGPTs and all of this new way of synthesizing knowledge and producing built on knowledge from it is having a huge effect on what we think of as copyright. And it's really brought out a lot of the debates that we've been having that nobody's been coming to these sessions to watch. But now you're here for AI. So these aren't old issues that we're going to talk about. What copyright also has is some limitations about it. That's why it's intellectual property rights and not property rights, is because there needs to be some limitations on what you own on your expression, so that we can build on those expressions, so that knowledge doesn't say stasis and we don't get to hold on to it and lock it down, that once you publish something, there needs to be a social good to that, a public good to that. That's what libraries, archives, and museums are mandated to do, to take this knowledge you've built upon others and make it available, and that we can continue in the progress of science and creativity. The parts in our Copyright Act in Canada that help us do this and give teeth behind it are fair dealing is the most important. We also have educational, library, archive, museum exceptions in there as well that give us specific rights there. But fair dealing is the one we always use as institutions as the first sort of line of defense when we're going to use bits and pieces of somebody else's information to build on our own. So fair dealing is the key exception that we need to think about as the talk goes forward. And then lastly is public domain. So public domain is the part that ends your economic control and your control over your intellectual property. Life of the author plus 70 is what we have right now. It was life of the author plus 50, but Mickey Mouse turned 70 years old. So we turned 51 years old. So the United States moved up, and then through international pressures, Canada had to move up. So that's a good sort of side note to show that no matter how we nationally are going to feel about where we should go with intellectual property rights, there is huge pressure internationally about how we can exert these rights and how we're going to protect them ourselves. And it may have to do with softwood lumber or who knows what, and we get repercussions of that in our own copyright legislation. But there are things that copyright does not protect. It doesn't protect ideas, observable facts, methods, processes, titles, short phrases. It has to be something that is recorded or put in an expressed form. It can be on the back of a napkin. It could be taped on a VHS tape. The medium is not important. It's important that it is recorded. The idea is that if I was standing up here with none of this being recorded, and I came up with a great idea of a windshield washer heater, and everyone heard it, I have no protection of that because I didn't record it, I didn't write it down. The person who did physically write that down and took that idea and put it on its physical form, that's the ownership that you get. And then using that, it's not about then me taking that idea that I gave you in the first place and talking about it again. That's not a copyright infringement. Me using those ideas over and over and over again, and sometimes not even sourcing you, that's not a copyright violation. There's some plagiarism in there, and there's some professional sort of misbehavior going on, but it's not a copyright infringement. I can't be infringing someone's copyright unless I took word for word and put it into my own document, and fair dealing didn't work for me. It wasn't enough to trigger a copyright infringement if I took a small piece of it. And it's important to think of the plagiarism as not part of copyright law. So that's all I'm going to give you on copyright. There's lots more, but that's when my daughter's eyes start to sort of sink and she doesn't want to hear anymore. So that's probably a good place to stop. Now, AI and copyright, it's not a question that's new to copyright lawyers and copyright academics. These are questions that have been plaguing the rights holders and user rights for decades now. And the problem with AI is actually that it's a catch-all term now. That when we think of this is a copyright violation because of how do we think of this within AI? But AI needs to be split up and thought of in its different components to understand the copyright implications of this. And the problem with this is the moral panic that comes along with it. Policymakers, creators, publishers, the people who have the economic value of those intellectual property rights that lots of us have signed away, they need a tool to hang on to the value of their product, which is this intellectual property. And all of this is wrapped up in what nationally and internationally we are all trying to grapple with in the terms of technological neutrality. So that it's when we want to go to the shelves and read books and think about things and then write them down on a piece of paper, we want to be able to translate that experience and that ability and that research into a technologically neutral endeavor, that because I scanned that book and started doing that type of work with technology as my tool rather than the pencil and the paper and that format, that we're able to do that. And that it's open and free enough that students at UMB can do it, students at Columbia can do it, students in Harvard can do it, so that we can all share this access to information in the way we all should as a human right. So copyright and AI needs to be split into three different ways to think about it. One is the ingestion, so when we take all of that information and scan it and put it into something, the training tools, the corpus of tools. What does it mean to take somebody else's tools to do that? And is that an infringement of their rights? And then what are the ownership and liability issues of the prompts, the way we use these tools and the ability we get or the effort we put into making it work for us? What kind of intellectual property rights do we get with that? And then thirdly, what comes out the other end? Are there rights? How do we think about the rights of what comes out the other end? There's no country that has come up with any great laws for this yet. There are some laws that will apply to this tangentially, but what I'm going to talk about is the general direction in which countries are moving and policymakers are moving and sort of best practice documents. So we'll first off with the ingestion of copyrighted content to train the LLM or the tool. This has a long history of case law and experience behind it from things such as Google Books, HathiTrust. There are two major sort of companies and projects that have ingested millions and millions of books, legally won the ability to do this because what they've done is taken those books and they haven't competed with the economic value of the book because you're using it to cut and replace and to find and to text and data mine from that content. So the courts and policymakers and publishers, have had to come to terms with, okay, this is an acceptable use of that work, and it's going to sit there in a copy on a hard drive somewhere, and it's going to be replicable. We're going to be able to redo that research again and again, and prove these facts that we're pulling from text and data mining. That's a concept that's been well proven or well justified in courts. It hasn't had the second two pieces to those to AI yet, but on its own, text and data mining is a generally accepted process within copyright, within fair dealing. The ownership of the prompt. So this is a process that's going through lots of copyright offices and legislators. Canada, and this is a personal opinion, but we have a very lazy copyright office. We don't do much in terms of processing and looking to see if you deserve a copyright in this. It just kind of goes through. We were one of the first countries who generative AI book or image was processed through the Copyright Office. Canada, yep, here you go, here's your copyright protection for it. They just didn't check that nobody looked. And then they tried it again. I think it was in Singapore and Japan. They're like, whoa, this is not your content. And then they backtracked. And so we don't have a great sort of process for our copyright review, but in the US, they take it very seriously. And that's, if you talk to ORS or somebody who will help you with patents or other intellectual property registration, you would do it in the States first for the more rigorous sort of a priori art research on what has taken place in that field. But at this point, the US Copyright Office has had submissions with, I think it was 600 prompts now, and that still hasn't generated a copyright protection for the output. The prompts themselves can get copyright protection if there's enough originality and enough intellectual effort that goes into it. You can protect those prompts to make it do something. Those are yours, and nobody can take them unless you've agreed to OpenAI's terms of use and they start pulling your prompts and they're yours. But in an LLM that you pay for and you read through the terms of use, you can own that intellectual property rights. So that's a step of ownership within AI that you can sort of think of as your intellectual property. And then the third part is the output. And the US Copyright Office has spoken about this and has made some sort of judgments on this as well. And what's the easiest way to think of it, as far as I'm concerned, is to think of it as something that left copyright. It's public domain now. It's life of the author. It's Mickey Mouse in another 20 years. It's yours to use now, but you can't own it. So the complicated part of all of that is that I've outputted something from an LLM. I didn't sign some licensing deal that says I don't get to sort of use this down the road. It's public domain material, but I'm going to start doing stuff to that public domain. You're going to take the Mickey Mouse and do enough of your own creativity to it that you're going to get some ownership and intellectual property rights to it. So that's where the line hasn't been drawn either. Like, how much do I have to do to this piece to get some ownership to it? And there's some sort of examples of how to make use of your what you do to a public domain piece of property to get some ownership to it. So and it's around that same 600 additions to get some ownership to it. So they're still grappling with it. There is no right or wrong to it, but you can get ownership to something that's public domain if you put enough of your own effort into it. And it speaks to that question about referencing. Like there's a professional obligation, And there is a legal obligation to say, I use something from the public domain. But how you differentiate which parts are yours and which parts have been generated by AI is nothing that's sort of in law yet. So there's no way to prove that. It hasn't gone to court yet and been proven. So here are some, because there is no law yet that governs how we can use AI-generated content, there are some considerations to make if you're going to use an AI tool or LLM tool in your graduate research, whether it be in your lab manuals, if you're drafting something, whatever the tool may be. Ownership is not there. It's not yours right now. But what you need to do is be able to provide sort of a litmus or a list of what you did do and how you did produce it to gain sort of some ownership of the end product. Here are some considerations to make is that, what third-party material have you used in any of this? If you're prompting stuff, if you're if you're a research student in a policy, what do you call it? A policy group that's trying to come to terms with ethics of biology research on humans, and you pull something that's not yours, that there is no sort of public domain version of it, and you dump it into that LLM. You have to think about whose property that was, where you've deposited that, and then what happens to that research going forward. I think there's bigger implications for sort of trademark and trade secret rules within intellectual property, but from a copyright standpoint, dumping that into an LLM could very well be a violation of your granting requirements. And it's something to make sure you're cognizant of before you start using them. Talk with supervisors, talk with your any industry that you're working with, or look at your granting agreements as well. Think about if you are, in terms of building training material, where is that material going to be stored? How are you going to collect it? And who's going to have access to it? You have to think about TDM. We might be open to TDM. It might be something that we could possibly do, scanning all those books and building your own database of works. The violation of copyright will be is if you've become a competition for those works. So if you've got a research group that can now access all of those books and distribute them in competition of the books themselves, then you are enjoying those books and the economic purpose that they were built for, so that you can't sort of make them available in its form. You can make them available in their zeros and ones and the data to be able to access it, but you can't make it available in its original format. So if you are collecting materials that are protected, make sure they're safely stored away, that they're only accessed by people who are part of the research project, and that they're deleted when they're all done. Our rules are national, and lots of these AI rules, I think, are going to have interrelated national rules that we have to adopt. But it's important to think about, if you are working with someone from a different country, that what are their rules in sort of collecting data and sharing data, that you trying to export large corpus of data to another country, there could be stricter rules around where that data is stored and how it's stored and accessed. So one example we had here was a researcher in Zurich who had hired graduate students globally after searching through libraries to see, I think he was doing something on education, and the graduate students were given a bibliographic list of books that he wanted to sort of pull together as a corpus of data. And the graduate students would come in, check out the books, take them home, and scan them and send them back to Zurich. And it came to our attention, and I wrote, we had a correspondence, and he was working within his rights to do it. But it was Zurich copyright rules that he had to apply, and there was nothing we were doing wrong by scanning that entire book and sending it to him for research purposes. So internationally, it's important to think about those questions before you get into research teams. The granting obligations. I think it's a big, hornet's nest we're waiting to get into when we think of the relationships with industry that we're doing. If we are going to enter into these research relationships with private corporation, how are we going to decide what's a not-for-profit pursuit, an educational pursuit, and what's a for-profit pursuit, and where are we going to draw the line with that, and with fair dealing and the copyright exceptions that we have. So I think that we're going to see down the road some need to define what we are as a research institution. Lastly, copyright does not need to be the impediment to the research. It shouldn't be, oh, I don't want to sort of acknowledge it, it'll just go away. The copyright is there to make sure that research can continue. So always reach out and think of copyright as just as much your tool as the rights holders' tools. Here are some examples of changes in terms of use that if you are thinking of pulling down data from different website sources, those words are changing. And even in our own licenses online, if you log into something and you have interest in sort of building your own database, reach out to the libraries, reach out to the websites. And there are examples of certain websites working with you to do this, but it is just because it's on the internet and you can find it does not mean it's accessible for you to crawl. There is words in the EU AI Act that makes it a requirement that you can opt out, and part of that opting out online is the opt-out text, so that when a crawler goes in, it sees this piece in the beginning of the text that says, you can't crawl this, you can't use this, we're asking you not to. But the implications of that are that it's no longer searchable, so that those don't read me sort of texts that conform to these rules are making it so the content that you're putting on there is no longer searchable by Google. So there's technology that's coming to help fulfill these obligations, but it's worth looking at the terms of use and contacting someone who can help you interpret some of that strange language. So the impact on research, I talked a little bit about it, the non-for-profit part of it. How are we going to sort of differentiate between this is a for-profit research project, this is a not-for-profit research. The research project that you talked about earlier, that's not-for-profit. We should all have access to it. It's public domain materials, and they're being publicly made available. Not long ago, we were doing a project that was pulling documents in. They were public domain documents, and we were trying to make them accessible to the public, but a proprietary vendor had control of all this. So you had to sign a license to get into it. So, but it made it very accessible to us. So that's the balance we have to make. How do we make these things accessible? They're public domain, they should be open, but who's going to pay for the platform? Who's going to pay for the technology to make it available to us? Is that 12 or 2? 2. Okay. The bias and transparency, we don't want to lose these voices either. We have a plethora of New Brunswick voices here, and how are we going to pay for and how are we going to make them available to the research that comes after this and make it so that our students and the students from around the world will have access to these voices, because it's just too easy right now to pull databases and corpus of information to do this AI research that do not resemble the voices of New Brunswick. This is what to take away. Think about where you're going to use the material, how you're going to use it, understand your relationship with the material, licensing. Is it traditional cultural knowledge? To what extent do we have some domain over being able to sort of share that and use it in research? Then evaluate the risk of how you're going to make that information available, where you're going to collect it, store it, what licenses you may or may not be violating. And always reach out for help and keep as best a records as possible. Any emails with vendors, any emails with archives, libraries, keep those with your research. Thank you. That's it.